There are times when you sound really decisive in your head and you don't get the reaction that you want from others. And then there are other times when you think you're being really open and curious and all you get met with is a wall of silence. So there's a really subtle non-verbal tweak that you can make to get the reactions that you actually want. Hi, I'm Frankie Kemp from frankiekemp.com, People Skills for Geeks, where I help professionals in tech be less vanilla and much more thriller. So there's a technique that will get you a very different reaction if you adapt it, and it's called the hands up, hands down technique. So I'm going to give you two sentences, and in the first sentence, which is going to be the same as the second, I am going to sound as if I'm curious and inviting discussion. And what you will hear is this: I go up at the end of the phrase and I go up with my hand movement. So look and listen to how this statement sounds more like a question. I think it's time to go. I also did a subtle head movement there, head tilt. I'm going to do it again, sounding more decisive. You will hear that there's a downward intonation at the end and a downward hand movement. Look and listen. I think it's time to go. That's not a question. That's a statement. So the difference is I go up with hands up to sound more curious, then down with my intonation if I want to sound more decisive, and accompany that with a downward hand movement. If I want to sound more subtle, or look more subtle rather, I can do it like this. With the first one, the curious one, I can simply do a head tilt instead of using my hands. For example, I think it's time to go. A downward hand or head movement is a very subtle way of indicating that you've already decided. So the second one I'll do now with the downward intonation. I think it's time to go. Now you'll find that it's much easier to do the upward and the downward vocal intonations when you accompany it with a physical gesture as well. They move in tandem. Now, I have noticed this technique in real life several times. So there was several months ago, I was in a restaurant and I was watching this interaction between this woman and a gentleman who was having drinks with some other men, and he approached her. She was reading a book. I was sitting there with some friends watching her discreetly. It's kind of what I do, people watching, love doing it, I will confess. But it was very interesting how this hands up, hands down technique played out in this interaction. So he approached her and he asked her if she would like to join him for a drink. And she did this: no, thank you. He approached her again about 10 minutes later and asked her more insistently, would you like a drink? And so she again replied, no, thank you. He did it a third time, and this time she responded with, no, thank you. Same words, but this time he just paused for a second and then nodded and then sheepishly walked off, and that was it. So you see, this was terribly subtle how she used the hands down technique to completely change the response that she got. So this small tweak will get you listened to completely differently. Hands up and hands down, or you can use the head for a downward movement or a tilt to subtly indicate your intentions.